We are absolutely delighted to have the Reverend Dr. Robert Flanegan with us. He is a priest in the Diocese of New York, was ordained by Bishop Sisk to the diaconate and priesthood in 2003. He has been serving as an interim priest since 2013 in 7 different parishes north of New York City. He is currently at St. Peter's Lithgow in Dutchess County. He's also an author of several books, and his latest book, which will be published in August 2020, we are all going to want to buy. It's Courage to Thrive, Embracing Joy, Peace, and Hope in a World Full of Anxiety and Depression. And for the last 10 years, he has volunteered with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the nation's largest suicide prevention nonprofit. And he says that he welcomes the opportunity to be with us today. And I just want to add, this came from concerns in my own parish of someone who was beginning to talk about suicide to his relatives. He was in deep mourning for the death of his mother and sister in late December and early January. And this isolation has been very difficult for him. So in the process of talking to the family, and they finally did call 911, and he was embarrassed, and you know, it's been helpful because it's opened up new lines of conversation for him with other people. It made me realize, and our committee realize, how fragile this time is for so many. We have essential workers who are overburdened. We have people working from home with children who are exhausted. We have people who are feeling totally isolated and depressed by themselves and not going out. And I think we've heard today that Bishop Dici is extending the time for parishes not to reopen until July 1st. So this is a heavy burden on all of us. So God bless you, Bob Flanegan, and we pray that you can give us some real help at this difficult time. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Vicki. Thanks. So, Victor, shall I just, we'll jump in and, okay. And I'll give a couple of just ground rules, that kind of stuff. Chat modes can be monitored by Victor. So as we go through this, if a question comes up, feel free to you know, put it in chat. What I'll do is try to work my way through this quickly enough so the material, so that we'll have plenty of time on the end to pick up any questions. And they're basically kind of four areas that we're going to cover. So maybe I'll pause if it feels right to take any questions, or at least just find out. So on that end. So I'm going to switch over to share screen. And there we go. And Victor, is that good? Yeah, okay. So this is a presentation put together by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It's as I said, the largest not-for-profit that deals with suicide prevention. It's the largest private funder of research in the area of suicide, suicide research and suicide prevention. So it's a combination of 4 areas. One is education, which we're picking up today. One is research, which is also an important area of their work. Then they do community fundraising to fund the research programs often through community walks. And you may every now and then hear about the overnight walks for suicide prevention. That's one was supposed to take place in New York City this year. I'm not sure if it's going to happen. But those happen nationally, and those are and then there are regional walks that area chapters do. So, and then the last piece of all of this is advocacy. So advocacy for state and federal programs for mental health and suicide prevention. So that gives you a little bit about a background about AFSP. Let's see. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So this is obviously right. It's a health issue, but it's also a complex issue. As we'll walk through the what happens with suicide from the research standpoint, you'll see that the complexities of suicide. It's not just that people are stressed that bring them to end their lives. There's usually a combination of things. So we'll take a look at that. And then, and this is important for all of us as caregivers, that since I think most of us are clergy on the call, but that it can be prevented. That there are ways and means that this can that suicide can be alleviated, and what we talk about now is suicidal crisis as the things that people face and struggle with. The critical factors that you'll hear from this, based on which is really good news in terms of research, is that time matters. In identifying who are the people who are at risk, and helping those persons get help. Those are critical factors. And I'll explain what we mean by time as we go through this. We as clergy can really work our way through all. We're a central piece to this puzzle. So here are the 4 areas that I want to cover. We're going to look at the scope of the problem. We'll look at current research and prevention tools, and then lastly, what we can do, each of us. And I think, as Gina, you brought up at the beginning, are we going to talk about what do we say about suicide in the language that we use? The terminology matters, because we can either, with our terminology, either perpetuate or work to end the stigma of suicide. And that's why some of these languages, I usually yell at the TV when they get it wrong, or at the newspaper, because there's things that we want to avoid saying, and then there are things that we want to talk about. So avoid committed suicide, failed or unsuccessful attempt. I think as we look at it now, I think you kind of go, yeah, this makes sense, right? We commit people to prison. People commit crimes. People, you see how we use it contextually. So when we say if somebody committed suicide, there's a stigma to that. We're lumping people together into an area that really shames. It can shame families, it can shame the people. And just like failed or successful or unsuccessful events, is that same kind of it's maybe if they were successful or not successful, as if it was a competition. So the way we want to language this, and why when you hear it, you applaud when you hear people do this, right? Died by suicide, or ended his or her own life, or killed himself or herself. Suicide attempt or death by suicide are appropriate ways to language this. And so when you have the opportunity, correct, when you hear it from others, correct people. They'll might be pushed back a little bit, but once you start talking about, people commit crimes, this is not a crime. It breaks it. Each one of us can break this, the stigmas that get associated here. Okay, so scope of the problem. Worldwide, 800,000 people die by suicide every year. And that's likely an underreported number, because certain countries don't report suicide. And think about this. I mean, as clergy, we may have run into this. Is we have these times where a family is like, they don't want to really say how that loved one died, and we respect that as clergy. So we've had, in the U.S., we've had to work legislatively to really encourage county coroners to appropriately designate how somebody has died. And and there's, it points to that stigma that's out there. The way we look at this, every 40 seconds somebody dies by suicide. That's one of those kind of hard to believe, but as I go through this, you'll begin to see why. In the U.S., it's the 10th leading cause of death. In some age groups, it's the second leading cause of death or the third leading cause of death. But overall in the U.S., it's the 10th leading cause of death, and the numbers unfortunately are rising. We'd like to think that we've got a handle on this, but I remember just a couple of years ago, we were at 44,000 deaths in the U.S. And now as of 2017, which is the latest figures that we have, is 47,000. So perhaps some of the numbers are going up because the reporting's getting better, but we're not seeing suicide lessen in the nationwide in general on it. So what does that mean? Kind of, okay, if this number of people have died by suicide, this is how many people on average attempt to end their lives. For every one suicide, there's about 25 who attempt to it. And in other presentations, we could really get into the fine tuning of the differences in gender and other particular at-risk groups. So if you wanted that kind of information, you can just make a note and you can reach out to me on an email, and I'll kind of things like what are the risk factors for LGBT folks or indigenous peoples. It all plays out in there. Military, we have that information. But so about 1 million people a year survive a suicide attempt. These are big numbers, so we're going to hear that in our congregations. The majority of Americans will feel the impact of suicide in either individually or communities. I know since we've been quarantined, twice, people in my church, this little church, people twice have come up to me and said, "Well, you remember so and so's name? They died by suicide," and so it's real. It's a real thing, and it doesn't impact. It will impact our communities, and we kind of know this. So, socioeconomically, or the economic impact of this is in lost wages and productivity. So that's an estimate. I mean, it's just pointing at the seriousness of all this. Okay. So let's take a look at the research. And one thing I would want to note for you all is that the research is really quickened, and the depth of research has quickened in the last several decades. The stigma was around this, that we didn't have the research going into this area as perhaps the cancers. It just, and think back when many of us were young, people would say quietly, say the C word, they wouldn't, and so now, cancer is not that same stigma, but suicide certainly has that. So let's look at the current research that's going on, which is really starting to unravel some of this stuff in good ways. There's no single cause. It's typically the confluence of multiple factors that are coming together, and we'll look at those factors. So, for instance, in the New York, in the city, we lost somebody to suicide. A doctor, you may recall, died by suicide recently, and the news said, well, this was, she was working hard on COVID stuff, therefore she died. The stress was too much, and therefore she ended her life. That's simplistic. I think if you thread the factors out of what was going on in her life, you would see that there wasn't one single thing going in, there may have been multiple factors that played into it. So always keep that in mind. There's a convergence of multiple factors that play into suicide, which is also good news, right? Because, you know, because stress itself isn't going to lead to it, and neither is mental health issues is going to lead to it necessarily. It's multiple things coming at each other. So so here we get into this. The large majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition. That doesn't, what it's important to note the opposite, that just because you have a mental health condition doesn't mean you're going to attempt to end your life, right? That's really important to keep in mind. I mean, to this, I mean, you know, as somebody who's faced mental health issues myself, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, just because I'm having anxiety or whatever, it doesn't mean that means I'm going to end my life. It just, you know, it's a factor that can contribute to this. So it's not, it's not, you know, you find out a congregant has mental health issues, don't freak out, right? You know, it's or a family member. It's something to keep in mind, but it's not you know, the sole cause. So yeah, and as it says here, 1 in 4 people will experience mental health condition, and most do not go on to die by suicide. So, you know, that's I think it's interesting because this is how these statistics are changing and understanding. It wasn't that long ago we used to say 1 in 5 people have experienced a mental health condition. So now 1 out of 4. It's just as we begin to lose the stigma of this, you know, we're getting a better sense of what's happening. Okay, let's see. Yeah, this is this is an important factor here, and this is recent. So, you know, I took CPE in around 2000. We didn't know this, that people who die by suicide have different brains. Their brains have changed from those who don't. Both the structure and function of the brain changes. We don't know. There are a lot of questions that I have around this. We don't know a lot more than that, but we can point to saying, what I would say is that your brain can be sick, if that's a way to put it, that you can, or you have a brain illness, that it just like you have a broken arm, or you have a high cholesterol, they're seeing something in the body that's different. And so that's important to note, that it is a physical effect, and why when we get into languaging and we'll get into kind of things that we can do, we just keep this in mind. I find this statement perhaps a little confusing. Most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life, meaning that there is people have, part of them wants to end their life and part of them doesn't. And our job as clergy, our job as family members and people who interact with people at risk, is to have them emphasize the part that of their thinking that says, I don't want to end my life, and have them move away from the thinking that wants them to end their life. And there's that kind of a push and pull that happens in the brain, in the thinking with this. So okay, so as we dive into what's happening to the suicide, what's happening when somebody comes to us and they're what I would say in suicidal crisis. It has reached a crisis point. They were likely been suffering for some time. And again, think back to brain and brain chemistry and functionality, that that somehow this has all come together as a crisis, and there's a desperate a desperate need to escape the pain. And then the other piece of this is that thinking becomes limited. There's a narrowing, the usual openness of creativity and alternative reasoning of alternative problem solving skills. They all kind of close down for whatever reason. So again, we talk about this point of where time matters, because the crisis, they find out that the crisis period is finite. That if you can bring somebody to beyond this crisis point, they're more likely or will likely not end their lives. And that's, it's important that we can take steps during a crisis to help mitigate what's going on. All right, so let's look at a little bit of who's at risk, so we can help identify what's going on. The research has looked at this as well, and so big picture, this is where the confluence or the intersection of risk factors come into play. We can have environmental stress like COVID, and isolating and those things. That's a risky factor, right? Because we can't socially interact. Okay, we're all going through that, but some of us also have a history of suicide, either in our own lives or in our families, and that's an additional risk factor. And then if you bring into it the sense of depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or those kind of mental health issues as well, then these all kind of come together into risky times. And that's where, so it's important for us as leaders to be aware of this now, because the environmental factor is so much greater than it has been. So those of us that are in a tough place on health, have a history of this, now is the time for us to kind of identify these folks. So let's look at who they are a little bit more. So mental health factors, these are, it's nice that this list is broad because it can pick up a lot of folks that we may not necessarily think of. So, depression comes to mind, but and maybe perhaps PTSD also comes to mind, but personality disorders and eating disorders may not always come to mind. Substance abuse disorders also play into this, and how many of our churches have the AA programs, right? And then had to figure out what to do with them, right? And clearly they're going to be extended out a little bit more time. And the good news is AA is meeting, they're having virtual meetings too. So that's good for us to see there. What else? Other health factors that aren't related to mental health, but are also really important, right? Is chronic health conditions, chronic pain, and then serious head injuries. So that I think the first two should, for me, make me think about the older folks in my orbit as well, and those that have chronic conditions, right? Because we can think of, okay, I know in my congregation I've got people that are being treated for depression, I'm treated for personality disorders or whatever. We can kind of say, okay, maybe as clergy we know this, or as leaders of churches we know this. The other piece of this is, somebody who's in pain may just, and then on top of it have COVID, this isolation and COVID, they just say, you know what, I'm done, right? And so that's how some of this can change for us as risk factors. I mentioned the family factors. I would highlight the child abuse in there as well, previous attempts. These are all stuff for us to really be aware of as well. On that, let me move into so environmental factors. I touched on the bottom two. The top two are for us also to help understand. You know, we can think of lethal means as guns, right? But lethal means are a few other things as well. Bridges, you know, certain, you know, we know more like in San Francisco, we think of the Golden Gate Bridge and people going off, but the bridges, or George Washington Bridge, we from time to time. But if you've been over the George Washington Bridge in the last few years, you see that there's this fencing, and then it with the curved the curved bars that come back in over the bridge. Those are for suicide prevention. The top of the Empire State Building has them too. You think, oh, this ruins my view. Well, too bad, because it ruins your view, but it keeps people, that means is prevented. And the other piece is, and this, it's not just with young people, but you know, we're aware of it now. You know, what exposure and contagion means is that some people say, oh, I'm hearing more people are dying by suicide, I'll end my life now too. You know, so that's what contagion is. It is a real thing, and it's an environmental factor. It's just one of those things that we need to be aware of. You know, bullying and harassment and legal issues, or losing one's job, relationship issues. Those all play into this as prolonged stressors as well. So now let's start to bring all this together. You know, is what you might see somebody with a, you know, this has it as a broken heart, right? You know, somebody's had a bad relationship, and okay, you know, the breakup has been really rough. You know, he or she is having a really hard time with it. But what we may not see is that there's a genetic factor risks in here, depression playing into it, you know, drinking more than usual, or prolonged stress at work. You know, we may not see all of these factors. So one thing is not the whole story, but we keep our ear to the ground about this. And again, I think of that doctor who ended her life last week, that we saw in the news, and there may have been some other factors likely at play on it. So so the researchers are now, you know, kind of looking for biomarkers. That's great. You know, we don't see that, but that's helpful for people in real prolonged crisis, and we can start to see what is the brain doing. They're also working on how does psychotherapy help, and in what ways, and the efficacy of that. What type of interventions really do work for them, and then the other research is medication. Understand and be open to the medication piece, that often people don't want to go on medication for reasons that aren't people be like, well, I don't want to go on the medication because it's going to mess up my brain. All right, that's a real thought process that happens. But the pause is, wait a minute, but your brain is actually hurt now. It's like saying, well, you know, I know I have heart disease, but I don't want to take the cholesterol medication because it might, you know, it's going to change me somehow. I mean, so there's a bit of an irrationality to it, but it's based, you know, there's based in worry and anxiety that are just part of what's happening at this time. So they're looking into medications, you know, the effectiveness of what medications and how to treat them. And so some new medications are coming out. Understand that for a long time, the only medications we had were from the 60s, and you know, for the last 40 years. And so we're starting to get new medications out there on that. So, okay, prevention. These are going to look at preventative factors that are going to focus on mental health issues. And what is that? It just happens to be May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So This is the timing of all this is nice, but this is also where churches can really step in. Protective factors are mental health care, right? And we can be proactive with our families, with our friends, and with our congregants around these. So it's important to feel connected to family and community support. So I think probably like most all churches are doing now, and at least I hear from my clergy friends and colleagues, is calling the members of your parish. That cannot be underestimated. I would also say calling your clergy colleagues, right? Get on the phone and talk to some of your others in other churches. Make a habit of it and be like, I haven't talked to so and so in a while. Reach out to them. It's important. Where our own mental health is a part of this care too. Problem-solving skills are this area of expanding limited thinking that we talked about before. So helping people think through options and engages the brain different ways. That's helpful. It's a protective factor. And then cultural and religious beliefs play into this as well. And from us as religious people, I want to I would say there's been a number of studies on the impact of religion on suicide prevention, and it's, to be honest, it's a mixed bag. So just to be frank, in some ways, us saying that God doesn't want you to end your life is a really good thing, right? If we say, if you end your life, you're going to hell, not so good, right? As a teaching, right? And think about the million people who attempt. Think about the millions of people that are affected by suicide. Our languaging matters, because all of a sudden we're layering in the stigma of shame and guilt and all of this. So we need to think of that. Religion and the LGBT community is, we do a good job, right? But not all religions do a good job with this, of being a helpful preventative. If somebody is thrown out of their religious community because of their gender, their sexual orientation, that's not so helpful. But if we go back to number one, and I use this when I talk about suicide in the pulpit, and I do on occasion, is I will say, God doesn't want us to end our lives. That's not the kind of flourishing. That's not kind of the spiritual growth that God wants from us. It's let's put it that God's not going to punish and shame and send to hell somebody who ends their life, remembering at the core that our brains are not well, right? That the biology says that this is like, we have a broken arm, we have a broken brain. It's not something that we should shame. We're not going to shame somebody for a broken arm, on that, and nor should we do that here. So it's important. If you're interested in kind of seeing that kind of research, I can point you in the right way. So just, again, let me know afterwards. Mental health care. We kind of touched on this. Mental health care is really helpful for this. Getting treatment for anxiety and depression. Getting treated, not just for the major bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, those personality disorders, right? But taking anxiety and depression seriously, in talking about that in your congregation, again, something that we can do from the pulpit, and something we can do as a means for helping our folks, I think is critical. It's something that us standing up and talking about it is helpful. Yeah, yeah. Only 2 in 5 people seek treatment. So there are a lot of people sitting in our pews that aren't seeking treatment. And there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of like, well, I'm not that sick. I'll be okay. You know, again, think about a physical health issue and how we would not wait to get treated, but people wait for this. So, yeah, mental health is a priority. And what we can do is saying, hey, it's, you know, seeing a therapist, seeing a psychiatrist is not a bad thing. It means that you're taking care of yourself. We can think of therapy as like physical therapist, like PT, you know. We hurt our back, we get our back surgery or knee surgery or elbows, whatever, shoulder, we go to PT afterwards. Therapy is just PT for our brain. And people, you know, people blow off PT too. My dad used to do that. Drive me nuts. So, and be patient. You know, not every relationship with mental health people is going to work, but encourage people to say, hey, if you're not getting what you want from one place, problem solve, find it with another place. It can happen. But the good news is, right, that there's and I've been a part of this on the advocacy side of getting it through federal legislation about mental health services being on the same level as physical health care. We're not all the way there yet. We're not where we want. The state laws are not all there. New York's pretty good. We call it mental health parity. So this is one of those things that we work on legislatively out there. So and I think we've all heard this, and we can encourage our congregations, you know, how they can now. I mean, exercise, sleep, diet, stress management are all important. If you're on social media, I would, you can go add to Instagram, to Facebook, AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Just search and you're going to get kind of a regular feed of positive things at this point of what we can do. So that's been their focus during this time period, is to share, hey, make sure you're getting enough sleep, check in with your family to get, you know, make sure you're getting outside and as much as you can, you know, and that kind of stuff. Because why go outside? Weather's hasn't been that nice, and you know, it's we're getting there. I guess this week it'll be better, I hear. So finally getting a little warmer. So those are the kind of things that we look at is how are we doing with those? Those can be for ourselves. There is a lot of support out there for loss survivors, those that have lost family members, and there is support for those who have had what we call lived experience. It's not a great term, it's a medical term, but those that have either attempted or had suicidal thoughts or been in suicidal crisis. So it's out there for us, and we just have to seek it out. And again, if you run into something where you're not sure what to do, you know, reach out to me. But I'll give you some other. I'm okay for some advice, but I'll give you some other information about like in the moment. This has been the biggest development in the last few years. The most important thing you can do is to put a suicidal person and their way of ending their life, put in between is time. Some studies have shown that the suicidal crisis lasts about 35 minutes. I like to say, you know, it's about an hour, but there's and that comes into brain chemistry, is that there is a shift in the secretion, whatever the hormones, the neurology that's going on in the brain. The crisis period is fixed. So if you find yourself in a place where somebody's reached out to you and they're you know, or a family member, you're like, what can you do? Is buy some time, and we'll talk about what to do next during that time period. Limit the means of access is really important, right? what happens is that often is that somebody says, well, I'm going to go to the bridge and jump, or I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go to the building, do this, or I'm going to take these pills and do this, or I'm going to, there's a variety of ways, right? And not to focus on them, right? So, but what's most important to remember is people usually don't have a plan B, right? Thinking's limited. They have a plan A. They don't have plan B. Well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to go do this, this, or this. It's limited that way. So time and prevention of access is really important. So here are the things that you can do, right? And I think blister packs for our older folks, there's something to that, right? Because it takes time to get all the pills open to do enough, as opposed to in a big bottle. It's a simple thing, but it's really important. So those are one of those things that we can do. All right. More specifics now into all of this. Conversations, best thing you can do, again, because it buys time, it gives us distance, is have a conversation with people. Caring and supportive, it's what we do. We know how to do this. You're not gonna say, if you say, hey, you're in a conversation with somebody and they're really upset, or you get that they're depressed. You say, are you thinking about ending your life? Have you had thoughts of ending your life? Do you have a plan on that? You're not going to cause somebody to die by asking those questions. You're not going to put the thought in their brain. You're either going to get somebody to really open up and kind of break down and say, oh my God, yes, I do, in fact, right? Or they're going to look at you and go, no, that's not it. Perhaps there's a small, we can always, because it's complex, there may be a small group of people that we're saying, okay, they might lie to you, right? But there are other factors that we can look. But the best thing you can do is by pointing it out, you're beginning to open and shed light on it, right? A people of light is, as we help them out of darkness into light by being there with them. It's important. So, we want to know what to say. You're going to look for the warning signs. You're going to reach out to folks that you think are falling into these areas, and then you're going to help them seek help. Dial 911 is somebody asked me saying, what do I do if I think somebody's going to end their life, right? Call the police, right? My example is I had a chat group that we all are friends of this one person, and there was this conversation going around like, we haven't seen Harry in a while, we're not quite sure what's up, he doesn't seem himself. And I said, all right, well, and he lived in Massachusetts. I said, well, I'm going to call the police to do a welfare check. Harry was pissed at me. And the interesting part is, Harry's been he's been a congregational pastor for 50 years, right? And he was livid that I had the police show up at his door and check on him. And he wouldn't, Harry wouldn't talk to me, or didn't include me in his emails. And he's never apologized. He never saw, like, I know you were just trying to do the right thing there. You're trying to be a friend to me. This is what, I know I live alone. This was important. No. Right. He acted just like anybody else would, just like, and that can happen. He was pissed. He was mad at me. He got over it. And frankly, I didn't want to live with myself to say, I know to send the police. I know I can call just not a 911, just call the department and say, will you do a welfare check? And I'll take the bad mood, or I'll take an angry person at me who's alive versus I didn't do something. So here I'm going to explain go through each of these at the same time, or one at a time. So if somebody starts talking about, even jokes about ending their love, don't take that joke. You know, it's not. I gently push back and say, you know, it's not. That's not good. That's not cool. That's not good to joke about ending life. You know, what's going on. You know, I call it out. They say I don't have any reason to. You know, these are all kind of, some of these make perfect sense now that you see them. That feeling trapped in unbearable pain are warning signs. You know, we might get somebody at the door. Of course, now they won't. But when we're all back together in July, but when somebody reaches out or on the phone call and says, "Hey, you know, I'm having a lot of this pain, just isn't going away," talk to them about that. That's important. The people may be indirect or direct about it, so they may, you know, be coy about it, and it's them just kind of getting used to it, about what they're, you know, and kind of sort of, and hopefully you'll see it. I also say is, if you miss it, do not beat yourself up about it, right? If you're going to be around suicide prevention long enough, somebody, you know, you're going to miss somebody, you know, or you're going to be in conversation with people who are going to be like, I should have known, I should have heard that. You know what? It's a complicated issue. Look at these behavior signs; they're important. The isolating, giving away possessions. I would also say is being overly happy about things is something to be aware of too. So that falls into mood, right? All of these are really important, but somebody also can be like, you know, somebody, wow, you've been really depressed. How are you now? Oh, I'm great, right? The scary piece to that is, and the trick is that they might have made a plan, and they feel good because they've made the decision. You know, I've talked to enough people parents who've said, he was so happy. We were so thankful that he had been in such a better mood lately. And, you know, it's hard. It's hard. So that's the tricky piece. These are the main ones to be concerned about, though. So on it. So bottom line is, as clergy people and as people who are leaders of churches, I say, if your gut is telling you something's up, something's up. You know, we know our people well enough to kind of, you know, wow, something was up. That was an odd conversation. You know, trust it. And you have to assume, particularly us as leaders of churches, that no one else is going to reach out. No one else is, you know, you might be the only you might be the only person who sends the police over to do a welfare check. You know, and that's okay. So how to do it, you know, how to talk to them is here's how we do it, right? Talk to them in private, listen, have them open up, and express, be who we usually are. I would say this, the one thing that I've found with in talking to clergy colleagues about this is, don't be scared about this. I mean, we're human, and it's uncomfortable when you hear somebody talking about ending their life. It's a natural reaction to us as human beings. So you can ask directly about this. Understand that your own self is affected by this conversation. It just is. And encourage them to seek mental health. And then yourself, call a friend or colleague. Just, hey, I had this really intense conversation. Just check in on that end. It's really important on that. But the hearing piece is really important. These are really important too. You don't want to say to people, "Oh, you'll get through this." You know, I know there was a campaign out there about it gets better and all that. I would say that's a bit of minimizing, because in that moment, it ain't gonna get better. It doesn't feel like it's getting better. Um, it, yeah, there may be a day, and it may be 10 years or 5 years or 2 years later that somebody says, yeah, it's better. Um, it, it, don't minimize feelings, and don't try to convince them that life's worth living and all, you know, that, and don't try to fix it. Our job is not, this is not a slow fix, a quick fix. This is going to take time. And so we try not to kind of just solve it, you know, saying, oh, you know, that's silly, you'll feel better, that kind of stuff. I mean, I think as clergy, we have this empathy in us, so you get it. Here are the 3 things, really, really important. Stay with them, but if you feel that your life is in danger, don't stay with them, right? So it, you just keep that in mind. You have to protect yourself in there as well. Why do I say this? There's too many times where, and I had one of the conversations that came to me is a murder suicide, right? Is murder suicide is, you know, you want to stay with somebody who's upset and ending their life, but you have to remove that person from the means, right? And that you need to protect yourself first. It's kind of that lifeguard drowning thing that they do, which seems cruel to kind of keep the person away if they're going to try to drown you. It doesn't help. Escort them to mental health services. Who among us wouldn't do that? So that makes sense. I'm going to leave this up for, I want you to do something here. Put these numbers into your phone. The 800-273-TALK. You know, put it as a contact in your phone, because that's somebody, you wind up in a conversation with somebody, you know, whether it's in your office or on the street or, you know, wherever we wind up in these conversations, or in the hospital. You know, Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a national number. The numbers, what often happens is you'll be routed to your state crisis counselors, and which is good because it's somebody local, more local, and they kind of get it. You're not getting somebody in Seattle, Washington to help you through your crisis in New York City. You know, it's the New York City, but the 800 numbers there. And then the text line, 741-741, is another one where you can, you know, young people may want to start there, right? Is to talk through, is to have access to these. So please, I think the best thing that I've seen is just throw it in your phone, and so you have it. You never know when it's, you know, it's like having the in case of emergencies numbers. And don't hesitate to call 911. I mean, it's okay. It's important to do, and I think as, you know, as clergy, we kind of get it, you know, that we can be in vulnerable, soft target places. So we're a little bit more used to it. But if your gut is telling you that you've got a problem here, just call 911 and let the police and figure it out. They're trained to help on this. So our job, you know, is to create that culture, and we can do that by sharing, you know, and reposting some of the important things from American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. There's mental health associations. There's Crisis Text Line has on Instagram has postings. Once you sign in, once you know, like or follow these, you'll see that there's a few more, and repost them from time to time. Feel for, you know, it's mental health month, right? It's the Easter season of light, you know, and rebirth. This, work it into your sermon. It's not a bad, it's what, when I've done that, I've had people come up to me afterwards and thank me, and they will say, you know, I'm glad that we're a church that takes this seriously, or that you've opened up a conversation. Only somebody who's going to be, I've never had somebody say, well, that's a stupid conversation to talk about. You know, I haven't had that. So this is the name of the presentation. You know, for more information in that, you know, feel free to visit afsp.org. It's a good platform. It's a good program to be, and they're in all the you know, you'll find them on YouTube. If you're a CNN person, the medical director of AFSP, Christine Moutier, has been on Anderson Cooper a number of times. I bet she'll be on as well. So that I am going to, and maybe we'll take some, if people have questions, so we have a few minutes. If there are questions.
Right next to mute is stop or start your.
I can't, we got to unmute some folks.
Okay. Who wants to, who?
Somebody's,
Okay.
somebody's saying, we can't hear you.
Okay. There. Now you're on mute. Good. You can ask the question now. You're good. You're good to go.
Me?
Yep. Yes, Rachel.
Somebody else is talking. Is
Yeah,
that?
someone else is talking, Victor.
Oh, I cannot see that person on my screen. Let me see. Oh,
Rachel.
Yes. Hi, I'm Rachel Fiore. I'm on the vestry at St. Mary's, Manhattanville, and I'm a retired social worker. I was very interested by the. I'd be interested in research on how the brain changes in suicide.
Yeah.
If,
So
that was a great presentation, by the way.
thank you. Thanks. So I would suggest if you go to the best, two things. One is go to afsp.org and look under research, and you'll get some stuff there. If you don't get what you want, shoot me an email, and I'll chase down the question just in case it's not posted in there. But they have they have plenty of they regularly bring up the new research, so they might rotate through things.
Would I see your email somewhere on Zoom or?
The one I use is here pretty easy. growingasoul@gmail.
Growing
A soul, all one word.
Growing a soul.
SOUL, not the growing a
Yeah.
soul foot thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you. There were some points that I never actually learned as a mental health professional.
Right. I think part of it is just some of this is it's new. They're developing and changing.
And it would be nice to have it addressed occasionally in church, because there are people who don't say anything, but who are depressed or having anxiety disorder or bipolar order. And I wonder, I've talked to some, and sometimes they feel left out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because their lives have been mostly painful. And so we talk about something being wonderful, but it leaves them feeling left out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matthew wants to come up. Yeah, unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to thank you, Bob, and Victor, and the commission. The very timely, great presentation, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks.
And a huge thank you to Victor and the whole commission for the regular, wonderful, timely, important presentations. And you need to hear that. And so thank you all.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. And I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So, Bob, there is something that we were, I think when we were yesterday talking about this, I mentioned something about the impact of suicide attempts and that reality in communities of color, Latino, Asian American, African American community. And right now, you know, like some of these in the presentation, you mentioned some important aspects of that, especially in how the space is limited for so many of them, and the factors are just increasing in so many of them as well. So would you say something, because I know that there will be some people here interested in saying something about this as well, in listening to something about the reality of race and demographics and finances into all of this as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say there's I'll send over to you, Victor, as well, some of the statistical information it's culled from CDC information. So it'll help kind of give you broad, kind of 1,000-foot looks at, who is really, who's at risk in what ways, and I do think it shifts. So first, I would say is suicide doesn't have. There isn't a culture, a group, an ethnicity or identity that isn't affected, right? So it's that pervasive, and so we can't, particularly with 47,000 deaths a year, it's pervasive. The statistics will show as high risk percentage groups are sometimes surprising, and sometimes are not. So it's not surprising that, or shouldn't be surprising to us that indigenous peoples have a higher risk of suicide. That currently military veterans have a higher risk of suicide. When you drill into that information, it's important to know that it's not just the current group that's coming off deployment that has elevated risk. It's veterans as a group. So it might be somebody from the Korean War era as well, or somebody who's kind of just come off a deployment in the last 5 years. So it's that kind of PTSD can play out over a lifetime. It's our LGBT community is a higher risk group. Equally said, at times they drill in to see that white males over 35 or between 35 and 50 are a higher group. So that's where it kind of drills in. You kind of go, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I would say that of the people that I've come across of lately, and it's where my population is right now, but they're older white men, the 60s, 50s, 60s, that have ended their lives. So that's where but I also would say is it's ethnicity or race. They would have come out with a preventative saying, hey, the suicide rate is less in this group, because that would have been a factor that would have shown up and said, oh, okay, it turns out that certain groups have better preventative factors. Think about some of the cultural connectivity relating in immigrant groups that, recent immigrant groups in the U.S. tend to have tighter family connections at times. That's a preventative factor, that type of or a protective factor. Just like those that that frankly they don't, we're in this awkward place in research, but that religion has, we have a protective, preventative factor inbred in who we are, because we elevate community and fellowship. For all those churches, all those. So now you have a different way to look at all those people who say the only reason they come to church is fellowship. Is now you can go, well, great, because that's a protective factor for their mental health. But it is, yeah. Does that help? Does that answer the question for you? Yeah.
And I think the Reverend Teddy Brooks has a question. Teddy?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Bob, great presentation. Thank
Thanks.
you so much. One of our many finest. Thank you so much. It is true that people do take their lives, but then I strongly believe there are lots of people out there who really, they're not going to try it physically on themselves, but they've totally lost their will to live. And it's a prayer that maybe drinking will hasten the process. Or maybe if I just get drunk enough and I slide, and get hit by a car, they really, for religious reasons or somewhere in their minds, they believe that if I do it, it's going to devastate my parents, but really I just want to die. So I think in so many ways, this conversation can help us meet people, like what's going on, yeah. So I think that is that group we should also be mindful of. Those who attempt are braver, maybe, than those who just try. I mean, maybe brave is not a word, but there are those who do attempt, and there are those who will not deliberately attempt, but they're trying everything to just end it forever. So that's just a thought that came to mind.
Yeah, I want to, two things I want to add to that, Teddy, is one is that that the opioid crisis plays into this too. Okay, that kind of the overdose is that maybe call it passive suicide attempt, but it can be caught up. So what you'll find is people will say, oh, they died from an overdose, because it's a little bit more acceptable that the drugs took them than to say that they purposely ended their life, right? And that's a family thing. I mean, we know the pastoral care issues. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, being technically correct with a family, come on, but understand that sometimes the opioid or the alcohol is a way to end their life. I mean, that's true. Yeah, hi, Vicky.
Yeah. So what do you do if you know that somebody had been talking about suicide? We sent 911. He was embarrassed, but I know he's drinking a lot, and I know he's alone, and depressed. How do we deal with the drinking? Can't go to an AA meeting. I doubt if he's going to go to something online. I'm not sure he has a computer.
Right. I mean, I wish there. I wish there was an easy answer, right? I mean, this is we're entering in an area that is perplexing, mysterious, and confounding. That has been my experience with this, and my experience at the psychiatric hospital. I was brought in a number of times to counsel a person who was determined to end her life, and I was there as well, maybe you can help by giving her a reason to not do it. I will say this: the counseling session that took place it was me, her, and someone from the, and somebody from the facility, or a worker, and the worker was there because at any moment she would perhaps try to end her life, and I had come in. I came one day, I recall saying, well, you can't see her because she just tried. We've got to, and so the perplexing and confounding piece to this is that we can do everything that we want, again, as professionals here, is that we can do everything we can, but it may not help, right? Just know that, and don't blame yourself for it. But go back to these fundamentals. Be in conversation. Remove means. Work to get them into the mental health system. And if it doesn't work the first time, work again. I mean, sometimes, with any of these systems, sometimes you need to switch counselors, and and that, because the personalities don't fit, or whatever, or it takes a couple times, or the medicine, the meds help, but they don't, it's not the right medicine. And this is where we have to be patient and persistent through all of this, kind of hang in there. But at the end of the day, as professional is, you may do everything you can, but we still may not keep them. It's just, I'm not going to say don't do everything but absolutely possible. But understand that the brain is this mysterious thing that we're getting better grips on and understanding, but it'll perplex us.
Thank you.
Bob, I wanted to ask about prayer.
Yeah.
Again, I think many of us on the call are darn good at it, but yeah, I love this book, John O'Donohue, To Bless the Space Between Us. And it's because it has unusual prayers in it. But I also find, so I looked up, and there's a prayer for the family and friends of suicide. So this is after someone has taken their life.
Right.
And I read that prayer, and I realize there are lines in it that are, I feel, not pastoral.
Right.
And I think we have to be really careful, right? Mm-hmm. But then when I look in his other list of prayers that are under the heading States of Heart, so he has prayers for grief and suffering and loneliness, like pick one. And there is a beautiful one for suffering that I like. But again, I guess this is asking you the question, are there any go-to prayers that you have, urging us to look and to share what prayers we might have? Because I know in my personal experience with people that have been suicidal, that's been a way I have felt that it's been easy to connect, to text them a prayer, send them a prayer, mail them a prayer, for people who are open to that. But again, knowing I can't just cut and paste, because we have to be really careful of any line that might feel shameful and such. But, and then also, like with Vicky, when you were speaking, I thought what came to mind also was just that simple line, like, I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me. I mean, it might just be a really quick little short line, but what are some resources that you have in that? And I open this up to others too, to share or post in comments, any go-tos in the BCP or anywhere, because I feel like we can really share these resources.
Good. I'm going to do three things here. One is, I do think that there's places in the Bible that really help us. You're going to get four things here. So, one is, I do think, and I think things of the the Serenity Prayer, comes out of AA. That can be helpful. This sense of giving over to God, that God's will be done, that we are possessions of God and in God's care, I think is helpful as a way of thinking through this. That there are times that the only thing that can keep us afloat is the trust that our prayers are being heard. I think of the Psalms. I think of so many of the Psalms that where David, I think, had a mental health issue, right? I mean, you read the Psalms from that point of view, you think, okay, Saul absolutely suffered from depression, right? Play the harp for me so I can feel better. I mean, that's it's there, from that end is certainly there. So those things to say. I would also say is particularly for the clergy, and we may open this up broader, is that in December, Bishop Dici is going to take part in with myself and one of the researchers, a suicide prevention researcher, and a biblical scholar, an old friend of mine who's an Old Testament scholar, who's going to look at. We're each going to look at from our own perspective of medical, biblical, theological, and pastoral. And the bishop's going to do a paper on pastoral theology in relationship to suicide. And so there's that resource coming. So I want to make you aware of that resource. I also want to make you aware, all right, I'm going to pitch my own book, right? That in August, when this comes out, it's essentially, it's a devotional that looks at depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and panic attacks, which as I'm in a better place myself now to say that I have experienced all of those, and I'm writing from that perspective. And at the end of each of those, each of the 40 devotions, I've written a prayer, and they're based, so they may, you may be like, yeah, this speaks, or you may be like, it doesn't speak. Understanding that trust your gut on these things, and then I'm going to be patient. Is I want to grab this book here. Is written by it's called The Suicide Funeral or Memorial Service. It is published by Resource Publications out of Eugene, Oregon, and it is done. The two people, one is a licensed clinical psychologist, and the other person is a rabbi. And they have put this book together. It was recommended to me by those, you can take a look at it, by the medical director at AFSP. So this is a resource that she felt strongly about, that hit the mark, and within it, it gives us enough perspectives, it's going to give you, it's a bit of a compendium of different perspectives, writing so they have it's not just a rabbi who's speaking about perspectives. You've got different faith traditions, so we've got plenty of Christians in here as well, and so you can see some sample eulogies, you can see some sample prayers, you can get a sense of how to address it, what is our role as clergy. So I think it's a thoughtful approach, It's worth looking at. It's worth having. It's not, because it's a short run book, it's not going to be cheap. I mean, it's not a $10 book. I think I've had it for a few years, but I had to spend, I don't know, $25 for it or something. So, but it's one of those resources that I think I would go to this versus just Googling, help, suicide, pastor, what do I do? Or whatever the usual things are to ask Google, I think that was all 4.
Thank you very, very much. This is really so insightful and helpful. I participated in the ASSIST suicide prevention
Right.
training in New
With
York
David Ryder
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was hard, but really helpful. And it has played out for me many times. What they taught us, which is what you said in terms of not being afraid to say, are you having thoughts of ending your life? And never have I ever had anybody upset that I asked that question, but more grateful.
Good.
And you're right. When I've had people say like, God, no, like, and it's genuine, right? But like Teddy said, not that they're not devastated and desperate, but they're not going to take their life. But what they taught us, which has always helped me tremendously, was the phrase that we want to keep you safe for now. Because the person who is in crisis can't even see past like tomorrow or next week or next year, but just right now, just want to keep you safe for now. And one thought I had was when you talked about that crisis moment or time being, let's say 35 to 60 minutes, it also helped me to think about if we or people can be on the phone or in touch with somebody for that period of time, can we get them through, logically, right? We can maybe get them through that crisis period that their brain is in. And I mean, I've seen it happen. So I guess that's a thought I had.
Yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind, right, with it. And I think the ASSIST program, it's a couple days. It's an excellent training. David Ryder has taught it, and I've known David for years, and it's taught Jesuit General is where he's housed it. And I think it's a great program. If you can put the time into it, it's great. You're going to get into deeper parts of this, and I think it's important. 2 is I do think, I guess I would think about it, Gina, is if I'm on the phone with somebody, am I getting somebody else to call 911? And to get 911 to go there and buy that time, as you work it through, because you ultimately need, once you're through the crisis, the impact of the crisis is profound, right, on someone's life, and it kind of waves that go ripple into all sorts of aspects of one's life. So that mental health piece is really important. Yeah.
Okay, we have reached our time. Thank you, Bob. I think this has been really amazing and a great conversation as well. And the resources are amazing. I think something that we can go back to, and I'm glad that we recorded this so that we can share this in the wider community as well. So thank you for your time, and thank you everyone as well for participating.
Yeah, thank you everybody.
Questions and all that. And Jim, I think, has something to say. Oh, no, okay. So that's, so let's depart this time knowing that wherever we go is holy ground, knowing that every conversation that we enter to is holy ground, and that in that space we are going to encounter God and the other as well. So go in peace.
Thank you.